Dalia Antonia Caraballo Muller, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today. I'd like to thank the CM team for this opportunity to share with you my thoughts on the theme radical. My plan today is to invite you into my own space of radical creativity and to share with you the story of how I discovered it. The greatest discovery of my mid-career has been the ability to truly identify my purpose by drawing my field research as an historian together with my teaching practice and allowing both to inform each other in surprising ways. What has and continues to emerge from this convergence is a powerful and radical new way of thinking about learning that brings students and teachers together as co-creators of knowledge in the service of global change. The name of my learning initiative is The Impossible Project, and it invites learners to bend as they take on grand challenges in and outside of the classroom. BEND stands for Building Individual and Collective Resilience, Enhancing Bold and Border-Defying Creativity, Nurturing True Collaboration, and Discovering Purpose in and for our world. To open up space for radical creativity, we must be empowered to think at the limits of the possible. Consider this an invitation. Before I share this exciting learning concept with you in greater detail and explain how it can revolutionize university education, allow me to invite you to sit next to me in the archive as I turn the clock back 118 years to the origin of my inspiration. So we're in the Cuban National Archives in Havana. It's hot, very hot, and very humid. The windows are open, which provides little relief to Cubans and foreigners alike, but allows the room to be flooded with the busy sounds of the old city. Glued to our wooden seats by the elements, we gingerly and delicately turn the pages of an archival file that threatens to disintegrate between our fingers. A letter catches our eye. It's from one Miguel Betancourt of Pinar del Rio, Cuba's westernmost province. The year is 1902. The US military occupation of Cuba is just over 3 years old and coming to a close. Soon, the Cuban national flag would fly in Havana's central square and a new republic would be born. Time was of the essence for Miguel Betancourt as he urgently penned his letter to the US military governor on behalf of himself and 310 members of his community. The tone of his message was resolute and demanding. Yet, we can also perceive a note of concern, as if Miguel suspected his mission might fail. Well, he likely knew that the military governor, whom he was addressing, was an unsympathetic man who looked down upon Cubans as racially and culturally inferior to white Americans. The chances of Betancourt, a formerly enslaved Black man, would be taken seriously by the governor were next to nil. In fact, the governor could not be bothered to answer the letter at all, passing it off to an underling without so much as a comment. While the governor's dismissal of Miguel was disappointing, if predictable, neither he nor his actions actually interest me. Rather, what does hold my attention as I turn the pages of the file are the contents of the letter itself. In the letter, Miguel Betancourt asks the governor to appoint a consul for the Africans residing in Cuba to represent their interests as foreigners on the island. And he vehemently states his intention to reject the Cuban citizenship he's being offered under the island's new constitution. In other words, Miguel believed that people born in Africa should be permitted to live in Cuba as Africans rather than as citizens of the emerging Cuban nation. But of course, Africa was not a country that could appoint consuls, and for this reason, Betancourt was dismissed by authorities as crazy. The authorities insisted that those Africans who had been stolen from their homelands and brought to Cuba in chains had to accept Cuban citizenship because they had no place to return to, and more importantly, no real way to return should they be able to identify their homes. Initially, this logic, though cruel, made sense to me. I wondered why Miguel didn't understand the realities of his own circumstance, deeply unjust as they were. Furthermore, the archival documents were organized in such a way that made it easy for me to put myself in the position of the authority figure and to gaze down skeptically at this petitioner. I flagged the letter as interesting, but not likely to make its way into my project. In truth, I didn't know what to do with it, and I filed it away, just like the military governor. Years later, a much more mature scholar, I returned to the document and saw something different. This time, rather than dismiss Miguel as crazy, I took a different perspective, one more generous to the writer and more critical of the archive. This approach yielded a different interpretation, one that centered Miguel's letter as a sophisticated critique of the challenges faced by Black people becoming incorporated into post-emancipation societies, and as a bold attempt to resolve that predicament. Skeptical that citizenship would confer true equality on African descendants in Cuba, and aware that deterritorialization had created a severance with the motherland that could not be easily repaired, Betancourt found himself in an impossible situation. But rather than agree to choose the lesser of two evils, Betancourt rejected the terms of the selection process altogether. Indeed, what distinguished Miguel is that he dared to dream something new, something impossible, something literally unthinkable to his statesman interlocutors. Miguel saw a world in which dispossessed Africans and their descendants could elect to exist both in and outside of the nation they resided in which they could inhabit a new political identity, one that restored a degree of sovereignty to them, one that made them a nation unto themselves. Not only was Betancourt's critique of liberal citizenship, which emerged from his keen awareness of the impossibility of Black belonging, far ahead of his time, but his outside existence, his utopian dream, was both retrospective and prescient at once. Miguel's vision reflected the politics of maroon societies, those communities of Afro-descended runaways that dotted the Americas during slavery, but it also provisioned something you might see in an Afrofuturist rendering of another possible world. What I think we stand to learn from people like Betancourt is that it is precisely when we are caught with our backs against the wall, when there seems to be no way out, and when the walls seem to be caving in, that we must perceive an opportunity, that we must call upon our resilience individually and collectively, and open space for radical creativity. Stepping outside of the constraints and conventions of thought imposed upon us allows us to return with a fresh perspective and generate radically new ideas for new futures while reflecting critically and differently on our past and present. It is this ability to dream under duress that I want to highlight today. This man from a century ago and many thousands of miles away has taught me what it looks like and what it requires to be brave enough to think at the limits of the possible. If we are to generate new responses to the challenges we face as a planet and a global society today and tomorrow, we have to be able to open and hold space for collective, creative, and critical dreaming. I am a professor of history, specifically Cuban and Latin American history, but above all, I am an educator who considers herself first and foremost a learner. Writing and reconstructing history is my craft. I'm at my best when I'm helping my students reinterpret the past and learning about it along with them. I live for that moment when a student sees and understands something new for the first time. And so for years, I have been thinking about how we can increase and sustain those moments of opening and discovery, because they hold a tremendous opportunity for all of us and for our societies. I am, of course, not alone. There are a lot of people thinking about how to prepare tomorrow's leaders, how we educate the students of the future, how we increase access for traditionally underrepresented students and also ensure their success. And there are many great ideas and laudable projects out there. But what is unique about the approach that I am evolving is this. Where most initiatives focus on the individual learner, I focus on the community of learners. Where most focus on the acquisition of core skills as the key to success, I focus on transformative experiences as the foundation for lifelong learning, and lifelong learning as the key to success. Where most initiatives measure success in outcomes, such as high grades, top test scores, admission to top graduate schools, and selection for top jobs, I, while acknowledging the importance of these outcomes, set my sights beyond them. Success, in my view, and for those participating in my project, is nothing less than the discovery of one's place as a global citizen in our world and purpose in relation to our world's betterment. Where most educational initiatives that focus on enhancing and transforming the student experience treat diversity and inclusion as additive, My project centers these as constitutional. Finally, where most similar educational projects are generational, that is, they impact one cohort of students at a time, the Impossible Project is multi-generational. I focus on inviting those who have gone through the experience back in to guide others, and in so doing, I support peer-to-peer learning while deepening the impact of the project for all. In sum, the Impossible Project challenges students to confront and solve world problems in a radically new way. So how does it work? Let me give you a few of the brass tacks. First, I invite students into what we call a flipped classroom. That is a classroom where the students call the shots and where the professor is a mentor and a facilitator rather than a holder of knowledge. Flipping the classroom thoughtfully also disrupts traditional inter-student dynamics, creating space for students that are often alienated or marginalized. Second, I task the students with confronting and solving a global problem in an impossibly short amount of time. This creates a sense of urgency and purpose. All hands must be on deck. Third, I tell students that the experience will not be graded, but that I have arranged for a public presentation of their solution at the end of the class. This creates a high pressure but low stakes environment in which everyone's perspectives can be voiced and valued. That the students must work together effectively to complete this project is a given, because to attempt the project as a group of individuals is to make it more impossible still. I support their team building as robustly as I can throughout the course. I also build in numerous supports related to research as they learn to think critically about what they are tackling. Just as the size and scope of the challenge and the limit of time push the students toward effective group work, so too do those conditions support the students' creativity. We must remember that the students are not experts at all in this subject matter, and so cannot adhere strictly to the conventions of thought about a given problem. They are, in fact, pushed and supported to think big from the beginning. The bigger they think, the more they will likely fail, but that's okay. I'm trying to encourage failure, and in so doing to build resilience, collective resilience. The leading edge, in my opinion, is preparing students to see themselves as global problem solvers by helping them to learn to rely on each other, to dream together, to fail together, and to keep trying together. Because our problems today and tomorrow will more than ever require flexible, creative, brave, resilient, and collaborative thinkers who understand our world, its people, and its other inhabitants as their own. I've run this semester-long Impossible Project class 3 times, and I'm currently working to adapt the concept to university courses in departments as diverse as computer science, management, history, and theater and dance. My excitement for the vision and confidence in it is bolstered by the enthusiastic response of students, faculty, and administrators alike who have worked with me over the last several years. True to the core concept of the project, which is anti-hierarchical, I have brought my students into the development of this concept as co-creators. In addition to relationships between teachers and students, I've also found that the Impossible Project enables new kinds of collaborations between faculty members across disciplines in the service of connecting the university's research, teaching, and impact missions. What I love about the project is that it is flexible without losing its center. The Impossible Project is more of an approach than a rigidly defined program. But while some elements are adaptable, its foundations are not. The Impossible Project must open space for radical creativity, must empower learners to take charge of their own learning, must inspire learners to see themselves as capable of leading change, and help them recognize that true and sustained change will only be carried forward by brave communities of thinkers and doers. To return full circle to Miguel and his plight in Cuba in 1901, it's important to remember that when faced with an impossible situation, Miguel chose creativity over conformism. It's also important to note that he failed. African-born people in Cuba were forced to accept Cuban citizenship. They were not able to exist as foreigners represented by a consul, as Miguel had hoped. Miguel failed, not for his own lack of imagination, however, but because the structures built to oppress him were deeply entrenched. Ultimately, Miguel was correct in his assessment that citizenship would not confer equality or inclusion for Black people in Cuba. A long struggle for civil and equal rights ensued in Cuba, as it did in every post-emancipation society, and those struggles continue today. But to those who would question the importance of highlighting a figure like Miguel, I say, walk with me. Miguel's subversive and fantastical idea was drawn from a deep history of struggle and has inspired freedom dreamers far and wide since his day. New visions like his remind us to question the limits of the possible, and questioning the limits of the possible enables us to resignify the space between the proverbial rock and the hard place. This in-between space can become a place of generative creativity and many possibilities if we make it so. To conclude, I invite you to seek opportunities to think at the limits of the possible in the service of our collective future. This practice requires an inquisitive and critical mind, a love of learning, a penchant for dreaming, a commitment to justice, a passion for working with others, and an unbreakable resolve to keep moving forward in the face of adversity. Thank you.